Okay, so our speaker today is Ashley Bell. Ashley is the Environmental Quality Extension Specialist with University of Illinois Extension. She addresses statewide issues related to waste management, land contamination, and air pollution, and she's passionate about educating others on generating renewable energy from waste materials through anaerobic digestion. Today, Ashley will discuss how anaerobic digestion technology transforms everyday organic waste like food scraps, farm residues, and manure into clean, renewable energy. Ashley, I'll go ahead and turn it over to you.
Thank you, Erin. So, good afternoon. I am an environmental quality specialist with Illinois Extension, and some of my areas of focus include waste management and air pollution. So, in today's webinar, we will be tying these two topics together and discussing how anaerobic digestion technology is used to turn organic waste materials into renewable energy while capturing that methane gas to reduce emissions into the atmosphere. So throughout today's webinar, we will have a few knowledge check questions. So the first one I have for you is to tell me how familiar are you with anaerobic digestion technology? Never heard of it, but don't know the details, know the basics, understand it well, or expert level. Okay. All right. So, before we jump into talking about anaerobic digestion technology, let's first talk about some terminology. So, let's look at the term anaerobic first. So, you can see that it contains the word aerobic, which means oxygen rich, whereas anaerobic, that means oxygen free or having an oxygen depleted environment. Now, with microbial process, that means that there's tiny living organisms like bacteria or archaea. Those are involved in the digestion process. Therefore, we can say that anaerobic digestion, it is a microbial-based process in which organic materials like say manures, food waste, or crop residues, those are broken down, they're decomposed in this oxygen-free environment to produce methane-enriched biogas. And that biogas, it can be used as a renewable form of energy. So if we look right here, this is our anaerobic digester, and this is where we have our oxygen-free environment. So if we place in our organic waste materials, like that manure, that food waste into the digester, inside of this digester, those microbes are going to be breaking down that organic material to produce methane-enriched biogas, which is captured for use. So I want to talk about the composition of what biogas is made up of. So its composition of biogas, it can vary depending upon what you're actually digesting. But typically, biogas is going to consist of primarily methane with about 30 to 40% carbon dioxide. You're going to have trace amounts of other gases like hydrogen sulfide and ammonia, along with a very small percentage of water vapor. Now, here we have our biogas that was captured. So it can be used in various ways. This biogas, it can be used to say fuel for a burner, for a boiler or a furnace. This biogas can also be used to generate electricity. This electricity can be used on site, or it could also be sold to the electric grid. Or you could even have biogas that is cleaned or upgraded. That means that we are removing the carbon dioxide and leaving only the methane behind. And this gas can then be sold to the natural gas pipeline, or we can compress that upgraded gas and use it as a vehicle fuel. Now, with anaerobic digestion technology, there are multiple applications, ways in which this technology can be used. It can be used at a smaller scale, like with a household digester. It can be used to divert food waste from being disposed of at the landfill. You may see them at a wastewater treatment plant, as well as at a farm where they're handling manures or crop residues. So I do want to point out that even though the design of the digester may vary depending upon those organic materials that are being digested, that are being decomposed, the same microbial based process is responsible for producing this methane enriched biogas. All right, so let's take a closer look at some of these applications. So you may have seen maybe in like a developing country, you may find where they have a small scale anaerobic digester just located right in their backyard. It may look like this here. And they may digest, say, manure if they have a few cows or a few pigs on their property, as well as any food scraps that they may have. And this will produce enough biogas for maybe preparing 1 or 2 meals each day. So here we have their stove here with their biogas burner. But since biogas has a lower energy density in comparison to natural gas, which is made up of primarily methane, you may notice that the orifice on their stove where the gas comes out is larger. And then, due to its high organic content, so there's lots of carbon in food waste. So, anaerobic digestion has also been used as a strategy for diverting food waste from the landfill. We may have heard that the US EPA estimates that more food is actually reaching our US landfills than any other materials, and this contributes to nearly a fourth of our municipal solid waste stream. However, we are starting to see more and more states, they're actually starting to ban their food waste from entering the landfill. So you'll see composting and energy recovery methods, such as anaerobic digestion, they're being increasingly used to handle this food waste. So if we divert this food waste from going to the landfill, not only are we saving space in the landfill, but we are also decreasing methane emissions that would otherwise escape into the atmosphere if we take advantage of digestion technology. So we can also have an anaerobic digester at a wastewater treatment plant, and these are used to treat sewage solids. So those are those solids that are left behind after the wastewater treatment process. And shown here in this picture, we have the Urbana and Champaign sanitary districts. This is their Northeast treatment plant. So at this particular facility, they have 4 anaerobic digesters, and they handle things such as sewage solids, fats, oils, and grease, as well as food waste. And so for this particular facility, they use their biogas to generate electricity and heat for their plants, as well as they burn off with a gas flare a small percentage of the biogas that they generate. All right, so moving on to our agricultural digesters. So instead of allowing methane gas to just escape into the atmosphere as livestock manure just decompose in an open lagoon where it contributes to greenhouse gas emissions, farmers, they have been encouraged to actually use anaerobic digestion technology to capture that methane and to use it as a renewable form of energy. So these particular digesters, they can be used to handle manures such as dairy, poultry, swine, as well as crop residues in their digesters. So I actually spent my graduate studies at the University of Maryland College Park, where I conducted digestion research at a USDA dairy farm. So I am most familiar with dairy manure-based digesters. So that's kind of going to be some of the focus of today's talk. So I have another question for you. Anaerobic digestion is a microbial process where organic material is decomposed in an oxygen-rich environment to produce methane-enriched biogas. Is this true or false? All right, great job. So the answer is false. It requires a oxygen-free environment. Okay, so when we actually think about biogas production, you can see from this graph here that there are multiple ways in which the captured biogas can be used. So, from manure-based anaerobic digestion systems, the most common use, the end use of biogas is compressed natural gas. And this is gas that can be sold as vehicle fuel. And so, followed by compressed natural gas, it's followed by the combined heat and power and electricity generation. So, with combined heat and power projects, they use that biogas to generate electricity, and then that excess heat from electricity production, that excess heat is used to heat buildings as well as the digesters that are on site. Now we're going to take a look about the science, or some people say it's like magic that goes on in the digester. So we're going to talk about how the microbial-based process actually works. So remember, we are dealing with a microbial-based process. There are lots of different anaerobic microorganisms like bacteria and archaea that are involved in this process of turning the organic waste material into methane-enriched biogas. So there are four major processes that occur in digestion. We have hydrolysis, fermentation, acetogenesis, and methanogenesis. So if we first start with the first step, hydrolysis, this is where we have our complex organic matter that enters into our digester, and it gets broken down in hydrolysis into some simple soluble organic molecules. And then when we go over to our fermentation step, we get these volatile fatty acids that are formed from those simple soluble organic molecules. And then in acetogenesis, those bacteria take those volatile fatty acids and they break them down into acetate and hydrogen and carbon dioxide, which are needed for those methanogens to create that methane enriched biogas. So there are lots of different microorganisms in play in this process. So we've talked about that anaerobic digestion technology. It can provide us with renewable energy, as well as when we capture that biogas, we're reducing methane. We're capturing that methane, so we're reducing greenhouse gas emissions. But I also want to point out that there are some additional benefits of anaerobic digestion. And another product of the digestion process is effluent. So with effluent, this is the undigested solids and the liquid that comes out of the digester. So post-digestion, you can have solids and liquids that can be separated. And while the liquids can be used as, say, a fertilizer, this actually helps the farmer to, say, reduce the needs from having to purchase a commercial fossil fuel-based fertilizer, because during the digestion process, those nutrients become more readily available for plant uptake, because during digestion, those organic nutrients, they actually get converted to an inorganic form, which is favorable for plant uptake. And then those solids that come out of the digester, those solids can be composted, and this creates a value added product. So you're able to generate a new revenue stream potentially, because those composted solids, they can be used as, say, a potting media for plants. You may see a farmer reuse it as bedding, or even some may use it as a soil amendment. And then, too, I do want to point out that if you have a properly operating digester, those also help to reduce odors that are associated with the handling of those liquid manures. So this can allow for homes and farms to actually coexist together. And then in regards to pathogen reduction, due to these digesters operating at an elevated temperature for an extended period of time, studies have shown that you have seen a reduction in pathogens such as E. coli as well as salmonella. All right, so we've talked about all of these microbes that are at play. So since we have this microbial process going on, the amount of biogas that is produced is going to depend upon the characteristics of the waste materials, as well as how you are actually operating the digester. So these here on this screen, these are some key factors if we want to maximize the amount of biogas that we're producing. So one of those being pH. Now with this microbial-based process, pH is going to play a very important role. It is very ideal for our digester pH to be maintained between, say, 6.5 and 8. So this is a neutral, this is an optimal, this is pH is optimal for methane forming bacteria. Now, I do want to point out to you that with digestion of food waste, it can have its limitations because sometimes with food, especially like your fruits and vegetables, if they have a high simple sugar content, that material can break down so rapidly that you can get an accumulation of volatile fatty acids. And of course, with those volatile fatty acids, it can cause the pH of the digester to drop. So when you have that pH drop, it can have an inhibitory effect on those methane producing bacteria from producing methane. So that's why you have manure, and oftentimes manure is actually placed into an agricultural digester with the food waste because that manure actually has a good buffering capacity to help resist the changes in pH in the digester from that food waste that has been added. Another factor that I want to look at is temperature because the rate in which biogas is produced is also dependent on the digester temperature. So typically our digesters, they'll operate in either the mesophilic temperature range, which is about 35 degrees C, or a higher temperature, which is the thermophilic temperature range between 50 and 60 degrees. Now, generally with these higher temperature, the greater the microbial activity. So that means those reactions, those microbial reactions, they are occurring faster. And with those reactions occurring faster, that means you get faster methane production. Now, with these thermophilic digesters, although you're getting faster methane production, research has shown that the thermophilic bacteria, they're actually more sensitive to environmental changes. So these thermophilic systems, they aren't as stable. And then again, with our feedstocks, those feedstocks you select should also be taken into consideration because if you have organic feedstocks with the simple carbs, proteins, and lipids, those can be broken down rather quickly. So they're actually ideal for anaerobic digestion. Whereas, say, if you have a feedstock that has a high lignin content or a high cellulose content, that's going to tend to be more resistant to microbial degradation, and it may need some additional pretreatment steps before being placed into the digester. All right, so let's talk about different designs of anaerobic digesters that can be found at livestock facilities. So listed here, these are the most commonly used agricultural-based digesters, and they consist of the covered lagoon digester, the plug flow digester, and the complete mix digester. So, regardless of the digester design that you may select, the same microbial processes that are responsible for biogas production are still going to occur. So we have this pie chart here. This is looking at the designs of anaerobic digesters operating on US farms. So you can see that the majority of those digesters are covered lagoons, followed by the plug flow and the complete mix. All right, so this is our covered lagoon. It is considered as the simplest design for anaerobic digestion. Now, with this particular technology, it consists of a lagoon, and this lagoon right here, it's sealed with a gas-tight, flexible cover. And this cover here actually captures the biogas. So oftentimes, this design of digester, they're designed from using a pre-existing manure lagoon that was already located on the farm. And these operate at ambient temperature. Since they're operating at an ambient temperature, usually a longer retention time is needed for the digestion process to occur, especially when you have a colder climate. So this particular design is more suitable for a warmer climate. So how this actually works, you have your influent here. So this is your manure that you're putting into your digester. And as that biogas is captured by our cover here, and then the generated biogas can be removed by the biogas pipe. The next design I want to look at is the plug flow digester. So this is a horizontal, it's a long and narrow vessel, and it can be made of materials like concrete or steel, and it's covered with a flexible material to capture the generated biogas. So how this particular system operates, the digester is fed at a constant rate. So what I mean by this is that daily, a plug of manure will be added into the digester daily. And during the treatment process, the wastewater travels in plugs throughout the digester. And this actually results in very minimal mixing. So let's kind of give you an example. Let's say that this particular digester is going to have a 25-day retention time. So that means if I put in a plug of manure on day one, it's going to travel through the system over that 25 days. And on the 25th day, when I put in another plug of manure, that digested manure, that first plug I put in, is going to exit out of the digester. In this particular design, it's also considered to be a more simplified system because it involves few mechanical parts for this particular design. All right, so we talked about the digesters, how it could be made of this long, narrow tube. So what's shown here is a long and narrow, flexible geomembrane bag here. And so these are equipped with biogas pipes, and these have been used also to construct plug flow digesters. So what you actually see here are pictures from a plug flow system that I helped to build in Maryland at the USDA Beltsville Agricultural Research Center. But since we were in Maryland in a colder climate, these digesters here, these bags here, were actually placed inside of these culverts here to provide some additional insulation. And additionally, these digesters, we equipped them with heating elements. So it had a kettle as well as radiant piping. So we used that kettle to actually heat up our manure before we actually placed it into the digester. And then the culverts were lined with this radiant piping, and we placed these digester bags on top of the piping here. And as this radiant piping it circulated a heated glycol solution throughout the length of the digester to provide some heat to our digester. Now, I also want to point out that sometimes in a colder climate, you may see these systems actually built within the ground. But since this was for research purposes, we decided that we would go with these culvert methods so we can to, to be able to easily maintain our systems. Now, in comparison to the covered lagoon and the plug flow digester, the complete mix digester shown here, these are usually associated with higher operating costs, and this is due to these digesters being equipped with mechanical elements for heating and mixing. So if we actually mix up our organic feedstocks, this actually helps to facilitate increasing the contact time of all of those microbes with our organic materials. And it also helps to minimize those solids from actually settling down here at the bottom of our digester. So you can see here, mixing is being achieved by like some electric propellers here. But there are some complete mix systems that also use a recirculating pump to help with the mixing process. And then in regards to heating, remember we talked about how an anaerobic digester is optimized at sustained temperatures. So in order to keep this digester at say 35 degrees C to maintain this constant temperature, um, we have heat exchangers. And so you can have a heat exchanger here, or you may even have hot water piping on your digester. And typically, these systems here are going to be designed with, say, a cylindrical vessel made of like steel or reinforced concrete. All right, I think it's time for another knowledge check question here. So, the most commonly used agricultural-based digesters are the covered lagoon, plug flow, and complete mix digester. True or false? All right, great job. The answer is true. All right, so shown here, these are some pictures of some research pilot scale complete mix digesters that we designed for field studies at the Beltsville Agricultural Research Center. So you can see here that these digesters were constructed from 850-liter conical tanks. And so these are plastic tanks. And we actually equipped these digesters with some silicone adhesive blankets in order to maintain that 35 degrees C digestion temperature. But we actually noticed that we were losing heat. So we actually built these reflective foil frames here around the digester to help encapsulate that heat. And we also wired the digester's temperature control panel to continuously monitor and simultaneously control the digester's internal as well as the external temperature of the digester. So when that manure inside of the digester dropped below 35 degrees C, the heating blankets would turn on. And then for mixing, we wanted to minimize the settling of the solids in our digester. So we actually made these top mounted stirrers and we used gear motors as well as these custom made stir rods that went down into our digester. So since our digesters couldn't take much pressure because they were made from those plastic tanks, we decided to build a separate biogas collection system using these 1,000-liter plastic bags. And you can see here that we installed these custom-made gas collection ports on them. Now, if you recall, I previously mentioned that biogas contains water vapor. So in order to prevent that excess water vapor from entering into our biogas bags, we actually designed these moisture traps and desiccant traps to capture the water. Now, this is our finished product. So how our research complete mix digesters operated, we would pump in our manure into this bottom port right here. And on each digester, we install these water sampling ports so that we could collect water samples to measure pH or volatile fatty acids because we wanted to know what was the health, what was the chemistry going on inside of our digester. And as biogas was produced, it exited the digester through this biogas collection port. And you can see here, this is where we actually collected the gas sample to measure how much methane was in our biogas. So then the biogas, it flowed through the bio collection port, and then it went through this moisture trap and desiccant trap to remove the water before it went into our bags. So you can kind of see down here, there's some discoloration down here at the bottom. So that means that desiccant is wet from the biogas actually flowing through it. So periodically we would have to change out this desiccant here. Now, let's kind of talk about the status of anaerobic digestion in the US. So AgStar, they track the status of US agricultural digesters as people voluntarily report that they have a digester. So if you're not familiar with the AgStar program, it's a collaborative effort between the US EPA and USDA. So they're actually encouraging the adoption of anaerobic digestion technology associated with the they're encouraging the adoption of this technology because they want to reduce methane emissions that are associated with the livestock industry. So they want them to capture this generated biogas and use it as a renewable form of energy. So this is data from June of 2024. This is the latest data that's available. And it's shown that there are 400 digesters operating on livestock farms. And if you can see by this red dot here, the majority of these digesters are digesting dairy manure as the feedstock. And then next you have the swine manure. So, with the operation of these particular digesters, it's equivalent to about 3.29 million megawatt hours equivalent of energy. So let's take a closer look at the status of anaerobic digesters that are operating on livestock farms. So you can see here from 2020 that we have seen a growth in these manure-based digesters. So you have reasons such as the renewable fuel standard, as well as due to more states that are implementing food waste bans. So where the food waste is being banned from going to the landfill, that has contributed to the growth of anaerobic digestion technology. And as of June of 2024, we had 6 digesters that were newly operating and 73 that were under construction. Um, if we kind of look at the potential of anaerobic digestion technology on farms, AgStar estimates that projects are technically feasible at over 8,000 large dairy and hog operations in the US. So if all of those operations had a anaerobic digester, this would have an energy generating potential of about 16 million megawatt hours per year. And this equates to roughly about 1,500 homes yearly. So I kind of want to back up a little bit to kind of point out in Illinois for you. According to our AgStar database, in Illinois, we have 3 manure-based digesters that are operating. So up near Freeport, um, there is a digester that's operating at Hunter Haven, and that's using dairy manure. And then down in Peoria, that is another dairy, and that's Hillcrest Dairy. And then up near Galesport, Galesburg, there's a pork digester that uses a covered lagoon. But I want to point out that with all of these digesters, the end use for their biogas is cogeneration, so heat and power. All right, so let me launch another poll question here. Most digesters operating at livestock facilities in the US use what type of manure? Beef, poultry, swine, or dairy? All right, the answer is dairy. Now, I want to point out to you that we talked about how if we wanted to maximize biogas yield, it depended upon the feedstock. So you can see from this chart here, this shows you the biogas production of different feedstocks. So you can see from this chart here that manures, those have a much lower biogas yield in comparison to other feedstocks like silage, food waste, or fats and grease. So I know you may be thinking that if you have a farmer to say, well, I operate a smaller dairy facility, so can anaerobic digestion actually be viable for me, considering cow manure has a lower energy density? Um, well, the answer is through co-digestion. So co-digestion means that you're adding another organic feedstock to the dairy manure, which can increase the biogas yield. And this can be a possible solution for making anaerobic digestion technology viable for the small to mid-sized livestock facility who may have been once limited by their animal waste capacity. So I have actually conducted research looking at ways to increase biogas production of dairy manure-based digesters. So some of my research has focused on investigating forage radish cover crops as a renewable source of energy and using this particular cover crop as a co-feedstock to increase biogas production of these manure-based digesters. So when I say co-feedstock, I mean that we are adding radish cover crops to the dairy manure digester. And here we have our forage radish down here. So I know you may be thinking, okay, so what led us to study, forage radish cover crops as a co-feedstock for these dairy digesters? Well, at this particular point in time, there was increased interest among farmers who were growing forage radish as a winter cover crop because they actually wanted to achieve multiple soil and environmental benefits. Now, typically, this forage radish is planted immediately after they harvest the corn silage about mid-August. And the cover crop, it doesn't compete with food production as most dairy farms, they have traditionally left their fields bare after this corn silage was harvested. In this particular forage radish, it was attractive to farmers because it increased crop yield, it suppressed early spring weeds. Now, typically, this forage radish, it would not be harvested because after several consecutive nights with temperatures below -6 degrees C, this radish crop would winter kill, and this would typically occur in late December or January, and that crop would rapidly decay, leaving behind this clean and enhanced seed bed. So for our research, we thought, could we possibly obtain another benefit from this radish crop by harvesting the above ground biomass prior to winter kill and using it as a co-feedstock in our digester with our manure to increase biogas production? And we figured out through our research, yes, we could do that. So shown here, this is our co-digestion feedstock. We harvested the above ground biomass, and this consisted of the entire shoot plus a small portion of that fleshy root that extended above the soil surface. And by harvesting only the above ground biomass, those benefits of increased topsoil fertility, weed suppression, compaction alleviation, those still remained because that below ground root was left to decay in the field. These are some pictures of us harvesting the radish. The radish was first mowed with a rotary mower as close to ground level as practical. This was about 3 to 5 centimeters from the soil surface. Then we had a that radish, that windrow radish. It was forged, chopped, and blown into an adjacent wagon for collection. And from this particular harvest, we collected about 7,000 kilograms per acre of above ground biomass. So it was actually estimated that we left at least 55% of that whole plant so that below ground root remained in the field for decomposition. So this is just giving you a closer look at how the radish looked after harvesting. But it should be noted that radish has a high sulfur content. And so remembering we're working with a microbial-based process, and sulfur can have an inhibitory effect on methane production. So we're kind of going to get a little bit into the research aspect of it a little bit. Now, we wanted to determine if co-digesting with radish could increase biogas yield. So we used 2 independent field trials that we conducted, and we used our research pilot scale complete mixed digesters for these experiments, and they operated in batch mode. So what I mean by that is that all of those organic materials that we placed into the digester on day 1, they were allowed to digest over a 35-day period. Now, shown here, this is just a bird's eye view of our experiment. You can see that we had 6 complete mixed digesters here for each of our field trials. So for the field trials here, the digesters either contained a manure only or a radish and manure co-digestion mixture. So for trial 1, we actually utilized the 27% radish mixture and a 13% radish mixture in trial 2. Now, I do want to point out to you that from our lab studies, although it was shown that increasing radish additions increase methane production, we actually decided to utilize these smaller radish loading rates because, for one, an existing dairy digester may not have the additional space to accommodate larger additions of radish. And then secondly, we also wanted to minimize clogging our digester system with solids. And we also wanted to avoid putting an excess strain on our digester mixers. So if you look here at the radish plus manure digester, we have right here our radish plus manure digesters here. Relative to its manure only digester, you can see that the radish plus manure digesters initially experienced a lag in methane production relative to its manure only digester. Now, this could have been due to methane production being inhibited by the sulfur content of the radish, or a longer acclimation period was required to digest the radish. Now, I do want to point out that although the manure-only digesters in trials 1 and 2 contain the same amount of manure, methane production was found to be significantly different between these 2 independent trials when they were normalized. Therefore, we couldn't determine the effect of the radish organic loading rate on methane production. However, it was shown that just by adding a small amount of radish, such as 13%, there was shown to when that 13% radish was added to the dairy digester, it resulted in a 40% increase in methane production. And this is one more graph that I would like to share with you. Remember I said the radish has a high sulfur content. So these graphs actually illustrate the amounts of methane and hydrogen sulfide that was present in our biogas. So during that initial incubation period, the initial digestion period, you can see that there were elevated concentrations of H2S, of hydrogen sulfide in the biogas. However, that hydrogen sulfide production, it rapidly declined as methane production increased. And this was likely due to that rapid utilization of that sulfur substrate that occurred over these first initial 14 days. And during peak methane production, we were able to produce high concentrations of methane in our biogas when we were co-digesting with the radish. All right, let's do another knowledge check here. Co-digestion is the process of breaking down two or more types of organic feedstocks simultaneously in an anaerobic digester. True or false? All right, great. The answer is true. All right, so let's look at some models that we've seen at farms um, to make anaerobic digestion a viable technology. So instead of a farmer owning and operating a digester, the digester is owned and operated by a third party. So that how this works is that the farmer actually leases their land to this third party, and that third party constructs and it operates the digester. And then with the farmer, they'll also pay a small amount of money towards the digester, and they'll provide the feedstock to the digester. So with this particular model, this means that the farmer doesn't even have to have the technical expertise to operate the digester, and it kind of lessens the risk for the farmer as the third party is actually responsible for operating the digester. And in another model with these centralized or community digesters, if there are several farms that are located in close proximity to each other, you could have these community digester model can be utilized where the farmers actually share the installation and operating costs of the digester. And so they will take their waste and transport it off site from the farm to the centralized digester. So I do want to point out that the biogas industry, there is definitely room for growth. The American Biogas Council actually reports that Illinois ranks ninth in the United States for its biogas production potential. And so that means if we were to fully build out the state's biogas industry, so that includes digestion of manures, wastewater, food waste, that could power nearly 900,000 homes yearly. So, of course, this would significantly reduce Illinois' dependence on fossil fuels while helping to cut those greenhouse gas emissions associated with methane. So if you're interested in exploring anaerobic digestion further, these are just a few resources that you can start out with. You can look at the US EPA AgStar website or check out the American Biogas Council website. So I have another poll question for you. How familiar are you with anaerobic digestion technology now after the webinar? Okay. And one final question for you. My knowledge of anaerobic digestion technology has increased. All right. Great. So thank you again for attending today's webinar. Erin, would you like to help us with some questions?
Sure. Thank you so much, Ashley. That was really informative. I really enjoyed learning about the radish research. That was really fascinating. Um, thank you for that. We have a couple questions. So, if others have questions, put them in the chat. Um, someone asked when you were explaining the different types of digesters, can you explain exactly what a plug of manure is?
So a plug of manure is just like the volume of manure that you choose to place into the digester at that particular time. So let's say you wanted to put in 7 gallons of manure at a time. That 7 gallons each time you put it in would be considered that plug of manure that you add to the system.
Okay. And then another question was, which of the ones that you discussed is the most efficient system? And I didn't know if there's differences in the efficiencies based on the system you choose, or if it does depend more on the inputs like you talked about. Can you speak to that a little bit?
Yes, so it definitely depends on the inputs of the digester. So when you're actually kind of getting more into the weeds of the digester, um, when you actually select the type of digester that you want to use, you want to look at parameters like how the manure is actually handled on site. So if, for example, if you scrape the manure out the barn versus if you add water to flush the manure out the barn, so the manure handling system, as well as the total solid content of the manure, is going to dictate of which digester you actually use for your system. But I will say that, of course, when you add water to flush the manure out the barn, that's going to drop the solid content. So you will be using more so like a covered lagoon for your digestion, more than likely.
Okay. Someone asked about the future of these digesters. It seems like right now a lot of them, the work is being done to get them on like more commercial farms. Are is there potential in the future for them to be used for like yard waste or like more home food waste?
So right now, in the US, we really don't have the infrastructure in our backyards for having a digester in our backyards.
Mhm.
But I have seen that, like up in Chicago right now, they're handling some of the food waste from different businesses, as well as some of the crop residues are being added to a community digester. So there are different businesses that are opening up these community scale digesters for certain particular inputs, but I don't know of any off the top of my head that actually take feedstocks from a household though.
Okay. Well, that's there was another question that like asked about feasibility of collecting food waste and oils from like restaurant sources. So it sounds like that might be like a next step, right? Or something that could be happening before we
Yes,
get to like the household level, right?
right. So I will say, even to give you an example, like the University of Illinois in Urbana-Champaign, they have a grind to energy program, and they actually take some of their food waste over to that Urbana and Champaign sanitary district that's fed into their anaerobic digester at their wastewater treatment plant.
Okay, that's a great example. Um, let's see. Someone asked about the costs to farmers. Are there any subsidies for helping install or putting in one of the digesters? Can you talk a little bit about the funding side of?
Yes. So with an anaerobic digester, so remember there's different designs in depending on the design, the more mechanical elements you have, usually the higher the cost associated with it. So you have digesters that range anywhere from say $500,000 to millions of dollars. Um, and so potentially, with Illinois EPA, they may be putting out a call for the climate pollution reduction grant that's maybe released, where they're having a particular project that's on biomethane for expanding Illinois' biogas industry. So that may be one particular funding opportunity for farmers to tap into to actually build an anaerobic digester on their site, as well as checking out talking to NRCS or the Farm Bureau and looking at different programs like the QUIP or I think even the REAP program may be available to help with providing funding for the installation of these systems.
Okay, great. Someone had a question about when you were explaining the lagoon
Mhm.
system and your slide showed like two ponds or cells, and they asked what the purpose of the second cell was.
So this is the effluent. So in order to be able to have space to add in additional influent, additional manure, these are the digested effluents here. So these are the what comes out of the digesters. So they could either use this for say spraying onto their fields as a fertilizer. This is storage right here.
Great. Awesome. Someone asked, kind of comparing the energy inputs versus the outputs. So like the energy input to like build the system and harvest or gather the fuel source like your manure, your crop residue versus the energy created in the long run. How does that kind of even out?
So I will say that this was for our radish studies. We definitely used a lot of energy to harvest that radish, to even grow the radish, harvest the radish, get it into the digester. So that is a point that you definitely want to take into consideration of what those energy balances look like versus the inputs versus how much biogas you are able to produce. But from a laboratory standpoint, as well as from the small scale in the field, we saw that we could increase biogas production. So there is more work to be done for this particular research of finding out how we can optimize that energy balance from input versus output.
Okay, awesome. Any other questions? While everyone is thinking, I am going to add into the chat a survey that we have for topics of these webinars for next year. So if you have an idea of a topic you'd like to learn more about, please go to our survey, give us your feedback. We're always looking for your suggestions. And we'll try to include that in the follow-up email too. And I'm sure we'll reach out again to get your feedback. Ashley, I'm not seeing any other questions. So at this point, we'll go ahead and wrap things up. So thank you again, Ashley, for sharing all of your wonderful knowledge. I learned more than I ever thought I would know about anaerobic digestion today. So thank you. And you broke it down and made it really easy to understand. So we appreciate you being with us today. And thank you to all of our master naturalists who joined us today. We appreciate you and you being here to continue furthering your knowledge. So thank you, everyone, and we'll see you in 2026.
And thank you.